5 years. That's how long the most feared army on earth failed. The Mongols had burned their way across continents, crushing armored knights in Europe and breaking empires in the Middle East. But here, at a muddy bend in the Han River, this unstoppable juggernaut slammed into a brick wall, or rather, a river. They were stopped not by a superior army, but by 2 cities that simply refused to die. Look closely at the mud, the freezing rain, the bloated bodies washing ashore. This wasn't just a siege. It was the moment an irresistible force met a truly immovable object. To understand why the masters of the open steppe were forced into a grinding, humiliating swamp war, you have to see the prison they walked into. From the outside, the twin cities of Xiangyang and Fancheng looked like just another set of fortresses. But to Kublai Khan, they were a geopolitical lock on the gates of the world. Think of this as the Constantinople of the East, a massive choke point heavily guarded by treacherous currents, acting as a cork in the bottle of the Southern Song Dynasty. If Xiangyang fell, the sprawling Yangtze River network would become a superhighway for Mongol terror. The Song knew this. They had sculpted a stronghold out of the terrain itself, using the wide, churning abyss of the Han River as a natural moat. To the north lay rugged death traps. To the south, the suffocating mire of rice paddies. The Mongols were masters of the lightning cavalry strike, but here, the geography forced them to crawl. At the center of this agonizing standoff stood one man, Commander Lu Wenhuan. Every day, he paced the ramparts of Xiangyang. He was painfully aware of the ticking clock. By year 5, the facade of a proud general was gone. He now spent his nights in the damp storehouses, personally scraping the final handfuls of molding rice from the bottom of wooden barrels, listening to the hollow coughs of starving civilians echoing through the alleyways below. He had to decide who ate and who starved. Across the water, the Mongol campfires stretched to the horizon like a fallen galaxy, a constant psychological weight. He could hear the distant drums and the restless horses trapped in a humid, suffocating jungle climate they were never meant to endure. Lu Wenhuan was playing a desperate game of chess against the most powerful man alive, holding his fractured city together in a tense, vibrating stillness. From the war room inside the Khan's pavilion, this had evolved past a battle of bravery into a nightmare of logistics and geometry. Kublai Khan wasn't fighting an army anymore. He was fighting the laws of nature. And for a brief, intoxicating moment, it looked like the Song were actually going to survive. They endured the brutal winter on a drip feed of supplies, sneaking narrow, fast-moving blockade runners through the Mongol naval lines under the pitch-black cover of night. Every time Mongol engineers attempted to bridge the water, Song incendiary teams burned it to the waterline. A massive, echoing cheer erupted from Xiangyang's walls when the last Mongol pontoon sank into the deep. The Mongol generals, men accustomed to erasing entire kingdoms in a single season, were reduced to digging muddy trenches in the freezing rain, building a massive ring of circumvallation to choke the cities. It seemed that as long as the Han River flowed, Xiangyang would breathe. Then, the psychological grinder began tearing both sides apart. Mongol morale plummeted as the heavy, wet heat rusted their weapons and spread disease through the ranks. Inside the walls, the Song grew dangerously overconfident, convinced that heaven itself had placed this river as an eternal, divine shield. But as the 5th year dragged to a close, a terrifying realization dawned on the Mongol High Command. The river wasn't protecting the Song anymore. It was trapping them. If the Mongol war machine couldn't cross the water, Kublai Khan decided he would simply weaponize it.
Tell the men to work faster.
The cold calculus of the Mongol command shifted. Time was no longer a resource. It was a weapon. Kublai realized that to break the unbreakable, he had to transform the Han River from a lifeline into a strangling noose. This was the pivot to a total, suffocating blockade, a logistical chokehold that turned the very water the Song worshipped against them. The Mongols began constructing a massive, interlocking network of floating fortresses and iron-linked chains spanning the entire width of the river. They ceased being mere soldiers and became engineers of despair, anchoring heavily fortified timber towers right in the center of the churning current. This was a brutal filter, an iron net designed to catch and destroy every single grain of rice meant for the starving defenders. To Lu Wenhuan and his generals, this blockade was an apocalyptic affront to the natural order. They believed the river was theirs. But to Kublai Khan, the water was just another step to be fenced in. He was taking the ancient Mongol tactic of the nurge, the absolute encirclement of a hunted herd, and adapting it to a naval theater. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. By visually dominating the water with these looming, inescapable obstructions, he sent a clear, devastating message to the citizens of Xiangyang. Your world is shrinking. The open horizon was gone, replaced entirely by a cage of Mongol timber and iron. The tension of this silent strangulation finally snapped on a moonless night, sparking a localized inferno. The Song command launched a desperate, suicide breakout attempt. A fleet of covert fireships, packed to the brim with sulfur, oil, and dry straw, drifted downstream in the blackness, aiming to melt the Mongol chains. It was a high-stakes stealth op. The Song Marines crouched behind wooden bulwarks, their breathing shallow, inhaling the sharp chemical tang of the explosives. The water was a pitch-black mirror, the silence broken only by the distant, rhythmic clacking of Mongol water wheels waiting in the dark. Then, the trap sprang. A Mongol signal flare shrieked into the sky, instantly bathing the kill zone in a garish, artificial daylight. The Mongols had been waiting. From the floating watchtowers, hidden archers unleashed a devastating volley of armor-piercing arrows tipped with burning naphtha. The stealth mission disintegrated into a chaotic, roaring slaughter. Song ships, transformed into floating bonfires, crashed blindly against the unyielding iron chains. Wet crunch of splintering hulls, the hiss of fire hitting freezing water, the thud of heavy bolts finding human flesh. The breakout hadn't just failed. It was violently erased. The river was no longer an escape route. It had become a mass grave. With the river entirely sealed off, Kublai Khan turned his terrifying gaze to the stone walls. He knew Xiangyang's defenses were far too thick for standard traction trebuchets, which relied on the raw muscle of men pulling ropes. Those outdated engines lacked the kinetic punch to do anything but scratch the paint. If he couldn't break the city with manpower, he would break the laws of war itself. Kublai looked west, importing elite Persian siege engineers, Ismail and Al-Din, from the furthest reaches of his empire. They didn't bring more troops. They brought a terrifying new math, the counterweight trebuchet, known as the Huihui Pao. This was the Manhattan Project of the 13th century. While the Song defenders were still relying on human sweat and ancient stone, the Mongols were about to weaponize the gravity of the earth itself. These siege engines were absolute behemoths. Towering structures of reinforced timber with massive throwing arms balanced by multi-ton boxes of earth and lead. To a military strategist, this wasn't just a new tool. It was a devastating paradigm shift. The Mongols weren't just fighting the walls anymore. They were bending physics to crush them. The first target in this mechanized war was Fancheng, Xiangyang's sister city across the river. The atmosphere shifted the moment the first monster machine was assembled. The chaotic din of the Mongol camp fell dead silent. No drums, no movement, just the agonizing groan of violently stressed timber. Then, a concussive thwack as the massive arm whipped upward. The projectile, a 300-pound boulder of solid limestone, tore through the sky with a low-pitched, unearthly hum. When that stone slammed into the ramparts of Fancheng, it didn't register as a crash. It was a seismic tremor that rattled the teeth of men miles away. The boulder didn't just crack the stone, it shattered a 300-year-old illusion of safety. The unbreakable fortifications, engineered over generations, instantly vaporized into a choking mist of pulverized dust and shrapnel. Fancheng was erased in a matter of days. Its ancient defenses were reduced to a flattened pile of rubble, serving as a sprawling funeral pyre for its slaughtered garrison. Now, Xiangyang stood completely alone, a solitary, starving island surrounded by a sea of Mongol iron. Commander Lu Wenhuan stood paralyzed on his highest watchtower, watching the Mongol engineers methodically disassemble the great trebuchets in the ruins of Fancheng, preparing to move them across the river. The entire geometry of the battlefield had violently shifted. But just as the Mongol artillerymen began to calculate the firing solutions for Xiangyang's main gate, a thick, unnatural fog rolled off the Han River. It swallowed the towering siege engines and the Mongol camps whole, plunging the terrified Song defenders into a blinding, agonizing void of suspense. The fog didn't offer a reprieve. It masked a grim execution. When the mist finally burned away under the pale morning sun, Lu Wenhuan looked out and felt the blood drain from his face. Under the cover of the gray void, the Mongols had dragged the towering Persian giants directly into the kill zone, pointing them point blank at Xiangyang's most heavily fortified gatehouse. The waiting was over. There were no more brilliant stratagems to deploy, no more midnight supply runs to organize. This was checkmate. To the Song commander, he wasn't just looking at timber and sling ropes. He was staring down the barrel of a weapon that was about to execute a dynasty. The walls weren't failing. The laws of physics had changed. When the first stone hit Xiangyang, the war ended. Not in a glorious clash of swords, but in a horrific realization. The concussive roar of the machine was followed by a 300-pound limestone block striking the gatehouse with the kinetic energy of a meteor. To the starving defenders inside, it felt as though the earth itself had been struck by a hammer. The sheer vibration dropped hardened veterans to their knees. Lu Wenhuan watched his invincible wall collapse in absolute silence, unable to hear the screams over the ringing in his ears. Through the choking cloud of lime and pulverized masonry, the truth became violently clear. The river had failed. The walls were meaningless dust. And the invincible heart of China had just been ripped wide open. From a grand strategic perspective, this was Kublai Khan's ultimate masterstroke, a flawless synthesis of global warfare. He had fused the relentless, hunting mobility of the steppe with the engineering genius of the Islamic world, using Persian mines to solve a Chinese problem. When Commander Lu Wenhuan finally walked out and opened the shattered gates, he wasn't surrendering to a superior army. He was surrendering to a terrifying new future, a reality where no wall, no matter how thick, would ever be enough to stop the march of progress. The impenetrable barrier was gone, and the Yangtze river system lay completely defenseless. China didn't just lose a city that day. It lost the illusion that anything could stand forever. The shockwave of Xiangyang's fall triggered a catastrophic collapse, wiping the Southern Song off the map and crowning the Yuan dynasty. It proved to the world that no geography, no matter how extreme, could protect you from a commander willing to adapt his entire doctrine. The mandate of heaven hadn't been lost in a pitched battle. It had been recalculated by the brutal, unfeeling swing of a Persian counterweight. Even today, the modern city built over those ruins carries a phantom weight, a lingering echo of the 5 years when time stood still. In the end, Xiangyang didn't fall because its walls were weak. It fell because the world had changed. The river failed. The land failed. Even heaven failed. And when the gates opened, it wasn't just a city that surrendered. It was an entire way of war, collapsing under the weight of something far more dangerous than an army.